So we are going to get started with our presentation this evening. Before we get started, I just want to welcome everyone on behalf of HCAN. Please be aware that tonight's event is being recorded. And if you are not familiar with HCAN, we encourage you to get to know a little bit more about us at our website, which is listed at the bottom of this screen right here at hcan.org. Handful of things that are going on actively for members right now is working on a local voters guide, organizing food delivery for the homeless, sharing minutes from our school board meetings and commissioner meetings, running racial justice book club, advocating for the end of burning trash in our local communities, and so much more that you can be a part of. Action groups are always welcoming new members, and tonight's event is hosted by our wonderful Indivisible Action Group. So I'm going to hand it over to Alice.
Thank you, Allie. That was great. I'm Alice Callison, one of the co-leaders of the Indivisible Action Group, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. Our Indivisible group works to hold our members of Congress accountable, and we advocate for progressive legislation. We plan and engage in a huge number of actions, such as protests, rallies. Lately, very recently, a lot of get out the vote activities and voter registration, letter writing, postcard writing, and we strategize often with other activist groups, and everyone is welcome to join us in this work if you're interested. I'd also like to take a moment now to honor and thank our event co-sponsors today who are helping to bring this event to everyone. They are Delco Indivisible, Indivisible Lower Marion, Indivisible Mainline South, Indivisible Narberth and beyond, Indivisible Upper Darby, and Pennsylvania Indivisible. And so just a moment here, I'd like to run us through a little bit of housekeeping. Apologies. I'd like to welcome you to use the chat to introduce yourself if you haven't already done so. Tell us your name, where you're from, and your affiliation if you're involved with a particular group. Don't need to be. And please use the Q&A feature that you'll see in your Zoom controls during the chat to enter questions you may have for Eric, not the chat. So we will gather those questions in that space and we'll share them with Eric at the end of his presentation. So Eric will present for approximately 20 minutes and then we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. And finally, note that there is closed captioning available in Zoom controls if you need them. So please feel free to take advantage of that. And now I am honored to introduce our speaker today, Eric Orts. Eric Orts is a resident of West Philadelphia and has taught for 30 years at Wharton, the business school of the University of Pennsylvania. He is a lawyer by training and has worked for a few years at the Paul Weiss Law Firm in New York City. He writes on topics including business ethics, corporate law, and environmental sustainability. Two of his books are Business Persons, A Legal Theory of the Firm, and The Moral Responsibility of Firms. A recent article is on Senate democracy. Eric is a lifelong Democrat and has been active in Democratic politics at various levels, but has never before run for office. He has 2 college degrees in politics and 2 in law. Eric is married and has 3 adult children. Along with his wife, Julie, he lives with a dog named Butterbean, seen here, and a cat named Dude. He is an active and lifelong member of the Unitarian Church. Eric is also currently exploring a possible run in the Democratic primary for the US Senate in Pennsylvania in 2022. Eric, we thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Alice, and thank you for inviting me out. Just want to say a few thanks before we get started. First to my cousin, Zinat Yousafzai, who's an HCAN member and was the first one to suggest that we do some kind of event. She's also I should disclose on our executive team of the exploratory committee that we formed to look at a possible race. Thanks also Pam, just a shout out to you for organizing so well. And thanks to all the Indivisible groups that are co-sponsoring this. I think one thing, we're going to get into some problems that we still have, particularly with the US Senate, but I think it is important for us to pause on occasion to recognize the success that we've had. So it is really because I think you could pretty much draw a causal line to groups like Indivisible across the country that have essentially prevented tyranny from coming to power in the United States. I don't think that's an understatement. And particularly in Pennsylvania, where the stakes were so high, we flipped collectively, everyone working together in 2018 helped to flip the House, and then in 2020 delivered the state to a Democrat for president, and it has made all the difference. So today I'd like to talk with you about the broken United States Senate and go into some ideas about how to fix it. And I don't think these ideas are you don't have to elect any particular candidate to achieve these ideas. We do need to make the highest priority in 2022 in Pennsylvania, turning our state blue. And whoever that is one of my friends once said, the most corrupt dog catcher in Philadelphia, he said, he would prefer to any Republican who will win the nomination. I think that comes close to the truth. So let's get into the general topic now, the broken US Senate and how to fix it. And here's an outline on the next slide. So first, I want to diagnose the problem. Here's Jimmy Stewart and the famous Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which we'll talk about later. The primary problem is the filibuster, which is in the news a lot. We'll go into some details about that and some discussion of my general position, I think, where we need to go on the filibuster. Other Senate reforms from the inside, which I think are less understood, but we really have a broken Senate from the inside, and the Senate itself can fix itself, not just about the filibuster, but other kinds of rules like the seniority system, how leaders are selected, et cetera. Then I'd like to talk about term limits in two respects. As I was presenting, pulling the materials together for this presentation, I thought of another idea on term limits, and I'll talk to you about that. It's also a Senate reform from the inside that senators can achieve. And then lastly, a proposal that I've written about in the Atlantic, and you'll see sites later, I can get them to you, and the American University Law Review for a Senate Reform Act, which will cure the main problem, as I see it, with the Senate right now, and that is that it has become radically disproportionate in terms of how it's represented, how it's representing the population of the United States, including Pennsylvania. So now on the next slide, let me give it, by the way, we'll have plenty of time for questions, so send them in now, and I will try to be as brief as I can through this presentation so that we have plenty of time. Okay, here's the problem. One aspect of the problem is that we are radically unequal in the structure of the US Senate, deriving from the original design in the Constitution that gives each state 2 senators, no matter how small the state and no matter how large the state. So here is a map of what the United States would look like if we apportion the states according to population. And as you'll see, California, for example, is massively larger than Wyoming. And yet California only gets 2 senators, and Wyoming is overpowered with 2 senators. So you get a sense of how, and the other example I give here is with all due respect to President Biden, Pennsylvania is 13 times bigger than Delaware. So why do we get 2 senators and Delaware gets superpowered with 2 senators? It makes no sense. And at the end, I'm going to suggest how we can change that, even though people have a hard time getting their heads around this idea because we're taught in school, well, of course, every state has 2 senators. It's in the Constitution. We can never change that. I'm going to suggest to you at the end of the presentation that we can change that. So what happens as a result? Well, there's a problem of voting weight and voting power. I'll skip over some differences between those, but here are a couple of examples. We essentially have minority rule now in the Senate possible, where theoretically, at least mathematically, 1/5 of the population can pass a bill or confirm a Supreme Court justice. And this is not just theoretical. The four Supreme Court justices that I have up here, some of them were confirmed by 60 vote margin, some by a majority vote. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas were all confirmed by senators in a vote that represented a minority of the total population. So that's an indication of the problem. And on the next slide, we'll see another part of the problem. The structure of the US Senate is racist. There's no other way to say that. It's not that there's an intentional aspect of what the senators currently are doing, although many of the policies advocated by many senators, I hate to say it, is racist. The structure itself and the history of how we understand it is racist because the only ethnic group that is overrepresented in the current structure of the Senate is the white population, as you see on this graph. In the median state in the Senate, it's 82% of the state is white, grossly overrepresenting white populations. And then with respect to Black, Hispanic, Latino, or Asian populations, it's grossly underrepresented. So for example, you see most overrepresented is the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population of 10% population total, and in the median state, only about 3%. So you can see that lots of policy implications are going to follow from that. And in light of much of the anti-Asian violence that we've seen lately, this small number of 3%, 3.5% national population, look at the median state, and a lot of that's driven by underrepresentation of states like California, Texas, and New York. Okay, and then I'll just look at gesture to this briefly, an idea of how big of a difference this makes. The four most populous states have more people of color than average, and they only get 2 senators, remember. California, Florida, New York, Texas, all considerably under the average of 74% white. And then the 3 least populous states, or 3 of the 4, are more white. Alaska is accepted because of its high number of Native Americans in the population. But look at those numbers, 85%, 94%, 86%, and that's replicated by a lot of those other small states in New England and the Mountain West. Okay, next slide. So that's the problem. Those are 2 problems. So here we're going to ask you a poll about the filibuster. So first problem is the filibuster, and Alice, if you want to go ahead and ask the poll for everyone. Oh, I can't vote. So we're going to have it's very, very good methodology, Alice. Good work. And we'll wait while Alice is pulling this up, and I'm going to give you then, after we have the poll, I'll give you a quick overview of the answers, and then we'll get into what the solution is. And by the way, there is a new book which I've just read, Adam Gentelson's Kill Switch, which some of you may have heard about, who gives a very good and reliable overview of the filibuster and what's wrong with it and why it has become such a problem. And he comes to the same conclusion that I'm going to come to. Well, let's see if we have the poll. How are we doing?
Still voting. Almost done.
Okay. Well, we'll wait for everyone to vote. That's one important thing. We have to let everyone have a right to vote. And just another plug for the book, Adam Gentelson worked for the former majority leader, Harry Reid, and so has a particularly good insight into how dysfunctional the Senate has become. It really doesn't make sense to talk about the Senate as the world's greatest deliberative body, as the current senators like to say. There's almost no deliberation. There's almost no debate. It's become a game of power politics, and that is really one of the reasons that I've become interested in this. And I think we all have a call to change it. So how are we doing now? Here we go. So let's see, which of the following facts is true? So how many people said None of the above. We have 16% got the right answer. So here to go over in case you got the wrong answer. Question A, Aaron Burr, who killed Hamilton, is responsible for the omission that allowed the filibuster. Question B is not true. John Calhoun used the filibuster to oppose anti-slavery measures during the Civil War. Question C, Woodrow Wilson adopted the cloture rule, which originally required a 2/3 vote and has now been reduced to a 60 vote. Cloture, as question D says, cloture today is 60 votes. It was reduced from 2/3 to 3/5. Mitch McConnell changed the rule for the Supreme Court appointments to only a simple majority. And so this shows that Senate can change its own rules. The rule with respect to the filibuster of 60 votes had applied to Supreme Court justices until Mitch McConnell decided that was inconvenient. So the last 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by Trump were confirmed with only a majority, simple majority of the vote. F, the word filibuster derives from the Dutch word meaning pirate. And then lastly, the stealth filibuster is allowed today, and the talking filibuster has been proposed as a solution. So let's go to the next page, and I'll give you my suggestion for what we should do with the filibuster if the TikTok works. So Alice, you want to try it? These are not my graphics, by the way. I had help.
Yeah. You know, I fear I may have done them. We'll give it a shot.
Well, that's okay. It's looks like the sound's not coming through. So let's just keep going. It's only 1 minute. If this provides additional incentives for you to go to friendsofericorts.com, where we have about 4 TikToks so far to check that out. Bottom line is basically abolish the filibuster. That's what Hamilton said. A fundamental maximum of Republican government requires that a sense of the majority should prevail. Almost no other country in the world, actually I don't know of any other country in which a major legislative body has a supermajority rule. Almost everyone that has looked at this says abolish it. President Biden has said, let's move to a talking filibuster, which is back to the Jimmy Stewart model, that you would actually have to stand up and talk for a long time. My concern there is I'm afraid that there are a number of senators, namely Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, I can imagine some senator from Kentucky, the younger one, also having an interest in standing up and talking for a long time and using it to make a political point. And even if you have the talking filibuster, you can stop all of this legislation. We need to have HR 1 passed for voting rights, or we're in a severe problem. We need to have gun safety. We need to have climate solutions, immigration, war powers, reforms, etc. So we really need to make a change. And I'll give President Obama the last word here. Next slide. And he said this basically, it's a very good read. It's a long read, but I recommend his book. But he basically says in his new book, the Senate filibuster in the end proved the most chronic headache of my presidency. And then near the end, he also says, I was just mad. This was with respect to a few decisions that have been made, mainly because on my very first day in office, I hadn't had the foresight to tell Majority Leader Harry Reid and the rest of the Senate Democrats to revise the chamber rules and get rid of the filibuster once and for all. We need to listen to President Obama now. If you read his book, you'll see all of the things that we were not able to do. We were able to have affordable health care passed, the Affordable Health Care Act, and then nothing. Climate was killed, immigration was killed, the Dreamer Act was killed, everything died in Mitch McConnell's hands because of the filibuster. Okay, so that's the filibuster. Next topic, and I want to move a little more briskly here to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, is other Senate reforms. So here's a few ideas. Why do we have a seniority system in the Senate? Does it make any sense to have octogenarians on every committee? Why is seniority privileged over other methods? There's only 50 senators, let's say, in each party now. Why don't you guys all, and mostly it's guys, why don't all the senators get together and decide who will be on what committee and who will be chair? Take Senate seniority into account, But this is not done in corporate boards. This is not done in universities. This is not done in selecting who will be a chair of a department. Why do we have such a lockstep seniority system? It is a terrible idea. We have to get rid of it. And the senators should grow up and be able to select their own leaders each time you have a new Congress that comes in. By the way, this is not a new idea or some radical idea. Senator Joseph Clark from Pennsylvania, hailed originally from Philadelphia, of course, and wrote about the same thing. He fought with Lyndon Johnson about these same kinds of problems. The power of the majority leader and the minority leader should be reduced. Why should Mitch McConnell, and with all due respect, the Democratic side too, have power forever as majority leaders? It doesn't make any sense. We have to reel them back in so that you can have deliberation, and the senators from different parties can have a debate about what kinds of laws you should have and you should pass. And the way to do this is by empowering the party caucuses that meet. Get together, you're in the same party, have a meeting, decide who goes on which committee, and don't centralize power in the hands of only one person at the top. Okay, so that's Senate reforms from the inside. Let's go on now to the next slide and talk about term limits. So some of you may have seen that former Governor Ed Rendell, who has been very helpful in advising me on how to do this thing called politics, since I'm relatively new at it, and Pat Toomey had published a piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer saying that we should have term limits. 79% of Pennsylvania citizens think we should have term limits. Why should Mitch McConnell be there forever and Obama has only 2 terms in his office? Doesn't make any sense to allow the senators to exist forever in these states, in these safe states, and then and have so much power. I believe we should have term limits, and anyone that wants to be a candidate for the Senate should not be doing so in order to build their political brand to climb the next step on the ladder. They should go in knowing that they should only be there for 2 terms and then go back to doing something else. Another idea that I've had in the process of preparing this talk is, why not have term limits internal to the Senate? So for example, why doesn't the majority leader have 2 term limits? Let's even make it 12 years. That should be enough. I think McConnell has been majority leader or minority leader for 39 years or something of that order. Give somebody else a turn. We should have, that's the way it works again in the university context and in the board context. No one is appointed to a board forever. Usually you have terms and you serve your time and you give someone else a chance. Okay, so those are 2 ideas with respect to term limits. Last word on term limits here is from my favorite Benjamin Franklin. In free governments, the rulers are the servants and the people their superiors. For the former to return among the latter does not degrade but promote them. Let's go back to the old idea that people serve in Congress and then they come back and they do their jobs instead of having permanent politicians who that's their profession. They are then indebted to stay being permanent politicians. So whatever somebody wants to give them in terms of money, et cetera, they're going to be there forever. Okay, let's go to the last point, and I hope not too far behind on my time. A Senate Reform Act. So this is an idea that I first showed to the public, at least in the Atlantic, and you have the site here of how to reform the Senate. So remember the diagram that I showed you at the beginning of how unequal the states are. Here is a proposal for how you can change that. Now, someone will immediately object to say, Article 5 says every state gets 2 senators, and Article 5 says you can never change that. It's the only provision now in the Constitution that says you can never change this. The other provision that you could never change was you can never outlaw slavery until I think it was 1820, and then they outlawed slavery. But my argument here is that we fought, I'll be brief and I won't go over all the points that I show on the slide here. My main argument here is that we fought a civil war over this issue of basically representation of people in the country. We had all of African Americans who at that time had no rights, had no participation in the system, et cetera. And since the Civil War, we have had a series of voting rights amendments After the abolition of slavery in the 13th Amendment, we then had the 14th, the 15th, the 19th, the 24th, and the 26th Amendments, all gradually expanding the franchise. And in each of those amendments, it says Congress shall have the authority to enforce this amendment. So in each of these amendments, Congress shall have the authority to enforce, that is, adopt laws to achieve the goals of this amendment. So my argument, following Larry Tribe of Harvard Law School, who talks about a times arrow in the Constitution, is that things have changed since the origin of the Constitution, the founding of the Constitution. Lots of things have changed, including fighting a civil war, and then having amendments that empower Congress to protect voting rights. Under that authority, and now it goes to the next slide, we can make changes to the representational structure of the Senate, in my view, that will reallocate the seats of the Senate. So long story short, and you can go to the article, it's somewhat complicated how this actually works. Long story short, Pennsylvania should not have 2 senators, we should have 4. Every state, though, should have at least 1 senator, just like the rule in the Constitution has it for the House of Representatives. There's no reason why Wyoming gets 2 senators and California gets 2 senators. California should have more senators, and New York and other states should have more, and many states should just get 1. Here's one bargaining position. We can talk more about the politics. First point on the politics is this change affects red and blue states relatively equally. So if you're a Republican in California, for example, you might like this because right now you get 0 representation in the Senate. California could set up a system then that allows some Republicans to have representation in the Senate. Same thing in New York. But notice also, I think we should add DC as a state. We can get into that if you would like. And if the citizens of Puerto Rico would like to be a state, there's no reason Puerto Rico should not be a state too. Under the current rules, they get 2 senators each. If the Republicans don't like that, we can give them 1 senator according to this plan. It's population based, but they would have to agree to have a fair apportionment of the other senators. Okay, so this is a new idea, but let me give the last word. It's not a completely unsupported idea. Let me give the last word to Senator Daniel, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He said, sometime in the next century, the United States is going to have to address the question of apportionment in the Senate. By the way, we're completely outside any other country in the world, and most other democracies. There might be one exception. No one else has such a radical inequality in how they have their national legislatures set up according to population. But going back to Moynihan, already we have 7 states, they're given in the note, with 2 senators and 1 representative. The Senate is beginning to look a lot like the pre-reform British House of Commons. That is exactly the problem that Locke looked at. That's why I'm calling this our Lockean paradox. John Locke looked at that problem, and at some point you just have to cut the Gordian knot, and you have to make the change and not be bound to a very ancient but beautiful constitution, but it doesn't work unless we change it over time, and this is one way in which we can change it. Okay, I think that is my last word. We'll go to the last slide, which gives you, please go to our website, and if you have an interest in finding out more, you can also contact me directly if you have any questions about our interest in a political campaign, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that at www.friendsofericorts.com, or my direct email is eric.orts@gmail.com. I'd really like to talk with you, and I'm excited about these ideas, and now really interested to hear your questions. Thank you very much again for the invitation to be here.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was really informative. Much appreciated. And I'd like to turn it over to Pam Magidson, one of our Indivisible co-leaders, who will be sharing questions with Eric. Thank you, everyone, for submitting questions in the Q&A while Eric was presenting. And if you have questions now, still feel free to continue to add them, and we will do our best to take care of questions. We've got about 20 minutes now. It's exactly 7:30.
Oh, sorry to go over a little bit.
You are great. No worries.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you so much, Eric. We do have quite a few questions, and I'm going to start with the ones that have to do with the Senate and reform and those kinds of things, and then there are also some political candidacy questions that we'll get to as well. So Gregory asks, the 2 senators per state is meant to be counterbalanced by the House of Representatives, right?
Yes, so if you look back, and I skipped over some of the details in the interest of time, and I'm happy to talk with you offline more about this. There was a compromise, and the idea was that the Senate would be a more deliberative body. Originally, the Senate, of course, was not directly elected. It was changed. It was changed from originally it was state legislatures elected 2 appointed 2 senators, and that was the scheme. We democratized that and arguably changed the Article 5 rule when we changed that rule to say, well, no, it's not 2 states legislatures. We are going to change this and say it's a popular vote. So there are lots of changes that we've made over time to this, and it doesn't change anything else about the structure of the Senate. So the Senate still would be more deliberative in the sense that 6-year terms. So I suggest in the article how you do the 6-year terms. It still represents the whole state, although it opens up some interesting possibilities of how you would represent groups in different parts of states. The same kinds of division of labor is applied. So the Senate still approves Supreme Court justices and other federal judges. It still approves treaties. It still reviews executive appointments. So there's really no change except that you rebalance. And I see some questions in the chat, and I think you have some. I also noticed my father-in-law is asking some of the hardest questions in the chat on this question. But yes, it's not an easy political lift. I'm not expecting this to be, a lead issue for the election or anything like that. But I think we do have to start thinking about this. And I think that there is a political answer to this, and we're in a world that was maybe a little less polarized. But thank you for the question, Gregory, and I'm happy to follow up with you offline about it if you'd like.
And thank you. So this is just more of a comment. I agree with 2-term limits for senators. The worst example of this is Lindsey Graham. That comes from Cindy. I don't know how long Lindsey has been in office. Is he one of the longest running senators there?
I would say it's too long.
Too long, for sure.
And it's too long for McConnell, and it's too long for many of the Southern senators. Let's really look at who this is protecting. It's protecting senators who are in safe states for a long time. And then seniority system gives them even more power. So we should get rid of term limits. And by the way, Pennsylvania is really hurt by this, right? Because we're a purple state. So we more reasonably go back and forth of who's representing our state. And so we don't get the benefit of usually as much. Example right now, Senator Toomey is stepping down. He's not building up his seniority to compete with some of the other senators who are doing that, like Lindsey Graham.
So kind of on this topic still, I don't see why any state would give up 1 senator. The House is representative by population. The lower population states will reject this to the death. That's from Peter.
Yeah, that's my father-in-law.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all right. I thought I convinced him on this already. Should read my article. Now, I do have a section in the article about that. So here's the quick answer. The quick answer is that yeah, a lot of little states won't want to do that unless they were pressured by the bigger states. But if you just look at this as a political matter, it's not a power grab by one party or the other. So Florida, for example, 2 senators in Florida may like this because Florida gets a lot more representatives. So Texas also might like it. Right now, they have 2 Republican senators, but in a rational world, I know that's expecting a lot. They might like this because Texas gets a lot more senators. So the big states are actually balanced out. Texas and Florida on one hand, New York and California on the other hand. And then the states that are losing senators are states like the New England states and the Midwest, and I'm sorry, not central Western states. They lose senators. Yeah, you have to get enough votes. One other way that you can change this, and this appears in the article, is you could expand the Senate to be even larger. You could double the Senate, and everybody keeps 2 senators at least, but then you have to increase the number of senators in the other states to be proportionate. But other countries do these kinds of changes over time. There's nothing, I think one problem I come from Philadelphia, so people think the Constitution can somehow never be changed, or that you can never sort of keep things balanced. And if you don't do anything, consider what eventually this will look like. That's why Moynihan's saying sometime in the next century. Consider this gets even worse, right? More and more people are going to move to cities, and the pattern just gets worse and worse over time. And you're going to have a few senators from relatively low populated states controlling the system. And that is just going to it's not a recipe for success.
Let's focus on the filibuster for a couple minutes here. Nancy would like to know, can you address the argument that some make that ending the filibuster will hurt us if we are in the minority?
Yes, I think that's a good concern. I think the problem is that was what we did before. So what happened before is there was a constitutional amendment to end the Electoral College and to elect the president by a majority vote. Birch Bayh from Indiana, Democrat from Indiana, was leading that charge because he had just gotten another amendment through. And the reason it failed is that the Southern Democrats were in alliance with a few of liberal Democrats and stopped it. And so imagine the world we would have. And one of their concerns was, well, we get to stop legislation we don't like too. I don't think there's really a good answer for why that improves the situation at all. It's a conservative answer, and it depends on, it assumes that you're going back and forth. And frankly, it takes the pressure off the democratic process. If you lose the majority, then yeah, bad things are going to happen. McConnell will come after Planned Parenthood. He's already said he will do so, et cetera. But I think that it's not a reason to keep the filibuster. The other reason to think about this that I think is helpful is the history of the filibuster. It's mostly been used to prop up slavery. That's why John Calhoun started it. And then it's mostly been used to stop civil rights. So not only do we not have the elimination of the Electoral College, in which case, by the way, Trump would not have won. He got only a minority of the vote, and George W. Bush would not have won. Al Gore would have run. So this argument, remember that this argument stopped the change, and it was done by the filibuster. The filibuster stopped that. If you had a majority vote of the Senate, we would have had the Electoral College eliminated, and we would have had a lot of other positive legislation over the years, including civil rights acts, probably 20 or 30 years before the major civil rights acts of the 1960s.
Okay. And any recommendations on how to get all 50 Democratic senators to go along with abolishing the filibuster?
Well, I think we're already making progress. I think Elizabeth Warren, I think others are really making this argument very strongly to get rid of the filibuster. They are showing what are the stakes. What happens if we don't pass H.R. 1? Then all these Republican voter suppression statutes that are being that are being proposed in all these different states are going to take effect, and that we're not going to have fair voting. People are not going to be allowed to vote. And so I think we have to point out the stakes, but you have to convince all 50 senators, and the most difficult one is Senator Manchin. But even he has now moved. So you saw that President Biden originally said, excuse me, I like the filibuster. He's been in the Senate forever. He used it on both sides. He didn't want to change it. But now he's saying, let's at least go back to the talking filibuster. So that would be progress. And now I've seen Senator Manchin has also gone to that. So we can take this one step at a time. And my argument, though, is that that's not enough. And that's why we have to win the Senate more decisively next time. Also with Senator Manchin in the middle, by the way, we're not going to really make a progress on climate change, for example. So we need a decisive majority in the Senate, not just 50 or 51. We need to win Pennsylvania in 2022. We need to win Ohio and one or two more. And then won't matter what if Senator Manchin does not want to get rid of the filibuster, we'll have enough votes to overrule him.
Okay, great. Marcy would like to know, how strong is the rule that the majority leader has complete control of what legislation makes it to the Senate floor?
Well, it's almost complete control. if you look at what happened with McConnell as the minority leader under Obama, after the first 2 years, McConnell said, I want to do everything I can against Obama, and he stopped everything. He stopped almost every major law. Nothing on guns, nothing on climate, nothing on immigration, no Dreamers Act. And he started stopping all the federal judge appointments by the filibuster. And so then Harry Reid got so upset that he eliminated the filibuster for most for federal judge appointments, except for the Supreme Court. And then McConnell got in power when he was in the majority. He changed the filibuster for the Supreme Court. So, okay, so one big irritation for me right now is to hear McConnell complaining about the filibuster. When he had power to eliminate the filibuster and appoint 3 Supreme Court justices by a majority rule, he had no problem doing it. And now suddenly it's the end of the republic if we eliminate the filibuster. So, so I don't think it is a problem. The majority leader is a problem. And it's almost complete power that the majority leader has when you have the filibuster. As long as he has 41 votes, he can stop anything.
On term limits, isn't there some value in legislators who serve for several terms and build expertise on particular issues in the process of legislating? That question comes from Ilyav.
Yeah, I think that's a good argument. I think there is expertise that people build up, and I think we do have the so-called lions of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, others who have been there for a long time and they build up reputation. But I don't think that that is enough of an answer. We also have people on the other side like Strom Thurmond or some of the Southern Democrats who had a history of stopping everything for a really long time. So I think that there's a good point to be made there, but I don't think it's persuasive. And I think if you don't have term limits on the president, if you do have term limits on the president, it's only fair to have some term limits on the Congress. And we might debate how much it should be, but I don't think it should just be unlimited terms. And I think we see the danger of that right now in the Senate and the House when you look at who is sitting on the committee chairs and how much and what they're doing with their power.
Great. Okay, now on to your Senate Reform Act plan. Would this plan require continuous modification to fix future population imbalances?
Yes, I have in the article itself. So if you go to the American Law Review article and it's in the slides, I show that we every census, so we're just having a census, you would redo the math. And so you would have changes over time, just like you have changes over time for the population in Congress, and I'm sorry, in the House. So it's a similar system. You would just add into the House system, but it would change a little bit less frequently because there's less numbers of states to allocate. But you can get the details in the article about how that works.
Okay, and Holly writes, so to make sure I understand, we don't have to change the Constitution to change the number of senators allocated to each state.
That's my theory. That's my argument. And it's the Senate that makes, the Senate is granted the power already under the voting rights amendments. Now, you might get a case that goes to the Supreme Court, but in my view, the Supreme Court should not be allowed to hear this case. Or if they do, they should not be getting in the way of this case. And then Supreme Court's another issue. I think we need to reform the Supreme Court as well, but that's a separate topic.
So a couple people have questions about small states. How would this plan allow small states an avenue to defend their interests?
Well, I think they still have the same interests. They still have the same power to defend their interest according to how important they are in the general scheme of the country. And the question is, why should you, just because you're Wyoming and you have lots of empty space, why should you get an extra senator compared to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which has these two, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, which are both bigger. Well, I didn't do the math, but they're both, I'm pretty sure, bigger than Wyoming by some margin, right? So, or why does DC, if you're worried about small states, how come DC is not a state? They have zero representation. So if we're worried about small state representation, then let's add DC into being a state. So I think it's not, you're losing some power Vermont loses some power. So, either Bernie or Senator Leahy have to decide to retire, and they don't get, by the way, you would, the idea would be you try, it's not, it's a gradual change. Well, like, with all due respect, why does Vermont matter equally to Pennsylvania? It's tiny compared to us. So no, I agree Vermont should be represented, but I don't think Alaska and Vermont should have the same representation as people in really big states.
Would a better plan be to combine smaller states?
Well, there's a complicated aspect of that. I don't know if there's any case where there was a combining of states. It's certainly possible. I mean, one idea I throw out in the paper also is the idea, I don't know how many of you saw Stacey Paskett from I think I'm getting her name right, from the Virgin Islands, but she's not represented. How come the Virgin Islands and Guam are not represented either? So one of the things I throw out in the paper is if you have, it's a little bit controversial if you would have the island states of the country be a state, the island territories come together to be a state. But I think on this theory, they're not that close, they're not that far off the being the littlest state if you combine the population of the Virgin Islands, Guam, and I'm forgetting some of the other island states. But why shouldn't she represent them in the Congress? Why should we have people who are living there? And by the way, that would certainly increase our attention to climate change if we had a Pacific Island state that represented those territories. So if we're concerned about small group representation, I think we should think about those who are not represented in DC and Puerto Rico and the Pacific Islands and Native Americans also.
We have some great questions about sort of big picture political situations. So Allison says, let's talk politics. With such a hostile environment in the Senate, how is any change to happen?
Well, I think it's hard, but I think we have to work on the other side. But I think right now it is polarized. And I think Ezra Klein has a good book on this, if you haven't read it already, on why are we so polarized. And I think the fault, I hate, it sounds partisan, but I think the fault is on the other side here. I think that the other side is always trying to score points and on the Democrats. And I think until the Republican Party reforms in the sense that they are trying to reach the majority of the people, that means they become not the white party in favor of stopping people who are not white from voting, which is pretty much what they've become. Until the Republican Party becomes a decent party where they are open to trying to reach out to all different groups, I think we're stuck. Now, having said that, I should recognize that the Republican Party was successful last election in reaching significant numbers of Hispanic and Latino voters, and their percentage among that group increased, and even to some extent among Black voters. So I'm not ignoring that. I think otherwise, I think some of these other changes would help you. So the problem is if you have someone entrenched from a state that is never going to, you have McConnell will never be removed from his majority leader status, from his position. It's really hard to reason with him. And it's a complicated question, Allison, so I'm sorry I'm giving you maybe not the best answer. The other change I think we need to make is in the Senate itself, if you read Kill Switch, you realize that there's not really any deliberation. The senators don't talk to each other. There's no time that they really debate. They say they're debating, but they're really not. They're going off and they're raising money and they're talking to the special interests. There's no real deliberation that occurs. So we can change some of these rules internally so that senators have to meet each other more and start to socialize again. I think it used to be more deliberative. Then I think we would start to build toward a better system. But until we agree on some basic ground rules, like everybody has a right to vote, I think it's hard to see us moving toward a non-polarized situation.
Okay, and is there any history that can tell us how these improvements in the process fared when they were proposed before? If they were proposed before.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean about history. I'm not sure what the question, what's the context of the question?
So I think it's about all these different reforms that you're proposing or we're proposing we'd love to see happen. Does history tell us anything about what happened before when any of these things were
I see.
proposed?
Yeah, I think history shows us how the filibuster came up. The filibuster was enabled because Aaron Burr forgot to put in the rule that the rule that you have if any of you are in city council or you go to meetings, you have debate and then somebody moves the previous question, and then you have a vote and everybody votes to have a vote. In the Senate, you have open debate and Aaron Burr forgot to put the rule in. That was basically how silly it is. And then it didn't really matter because you only had 30 or so senators for a while. And then John Calhoun opened up the filibuster to stop slavery, stop anti-slavery movement. And then you had the Southern Democrats in the post-Civil War period used it even more to stop civil rights, anti-lynching laws, for example. So I think with that history, you can understand that if you move that direction one way, there's no reason not to move it back the other way and say, sorry, Aaron Burr made a mistake, Hamilton's right, and Madison's right, and majority rule should apply. That's what we should have. And we've done that already. Another example of history is McConnell just changed the filibuster rule with respect to the Supreme Court. All he had to do is have a majority of the Republican votes. So now the Democrats have a majority, change the legislative filibuster. One of my frustrations, I have to say, and maybe I get this from talking with Governor Rendell, Democrats are wusses. That's what, quoting Rendell, Democrats sometimes are just wusses, let's face it. We have got to get serious. We have to play hardball. McConnell plays hardball. Now we have a majority and we have this huge legislative agenda and we're pushing through, we're using just, we're afraid to take the reins and push our agenda forward. We have to do stuff on climate, on immigration. We are in a crisis moment and the Democrats are hesitating. So yeah, if you got to get to Manchin, let's put pressure on Manchin to change. We got to get rid of the filibuster. And we can do it. You can do it. There's nothing stopping you. So history only shows that if you have the will, you can change the rule.
There are so many great questions, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about this one, which Megan asks, why are you considering a run for the US Senate?
Well, thank you, Megan, for the question. I'm thinking about it like a lot of you. And again, just going back to the Indivisible movement and everything else, I'm not unlike anyone else who was working for Hillary over the summer and in 2016 had a very terrible day. And I had a premonition of it that day and kind of broke down in tears. And then the aftermath was terrible. And it's compounded by the fact that Donald Trump is a Wharton graduate. I'm a Wharton professor. And frankly, I take it personally. And he seriously and I think I'm preaching to converted here, but our democracy is in trouble. And so number one, why? I want to preserve our democracy. And I think I might be one person qualified for this. And that's one reason I started to look at it. Two, for me personally, the climate. That's not the number one issue for most people in Pennsylvania, because most people in Pennsylvania have to worry about jobs, education, some healthcare. But for me, we have to start moving on climate. I've been looking at climate for a very long time. I've done a lot of programs related to this topic at Penn. That's another reason we have to get rid of the filibuster. And I've been looking at one of the problems, and the problem to me is not that business is in the way. We have business, well, except for the fossil fuel companies, they're stopping things. But business is able to solve the climate problem. We have the technology to solve the climate problem. The only thing in the way of solving climate is politics and the fossil fuel companies that are stopping the politics of change that will enable us. Now, I think we can move in the right direction, but we need a Senate that is going to improve the bills that move us in the right direction. So that's the why answer. And then the question of why I think I might be qualified. You can look at my resume and kind of say I'm qualified in those ways, but I really think the main thing is that I care about people. And I think about my dad and his example. He was a veterinarian. I grew up in a small town on the Ohio River, 60 miles from Pittsburgh. It was a coal and steel town. It now is half the population of what it was. I think I understand and can talk to people in Pennsylvania, in all different parts of Pennsylvania, who are hurting. And I think that I have the capability to try to help them out. So that's why we are considering making a jump into it. It's not easy. We're doing it with our eyes open. We have a plan for what looks like it's feasible, but that's the reason why I'm thinking about it.
I think we're at time in terms of questions because I know we have a couple things to wrap up. I am trying to keep track of all the questions that didn't get answered in a Google Doc, so maybe we can explore getting those to you somehow, Eric, because I apologize to everyone whose questions couldn't be answered, at least
That'd be great.
yet. But I know I wanted to turn it back to Alice for a couple more minutes toward the end here.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Eric. That was terrific. And because we're indivisible and we're action oriented, I wanted to take us through a really quick action that we can take right now to get the filibuster ended. And if you've learned anything from hanging out with indivisible folks, it's that members of Congress are paying attention to what you tell them. So we'd like you to take 1 minute right now to use ResistBot. If you haven't used ResistBot, we invite you to try. And it's basically a bot where you can enter a message and send it directly to your members of Congress. So you can text the word resist to 50409. And when prompted to talk who you want to talk to, choose senators and write to your senators and ask them to support the end of the filibuster. Simple message, doesn't need to be elaborate. Go ahead and do that. If you've not used filibuster before, or excuse me, if you've not used ResistBot before, it will probably ask you your zip code so it can figure out who your senators are. So take a moment to do that right now. And while you're doing that, I'll also mention that Indivisible, led by Indivisible New York, is sponsoring Filibuster Friday tomorrow as a hashtag to get it trending and spread the word about our desire to end the filibuster. So we encourage you to tweet tomorrow, tweet to your senators, and let them know that you are in favor of ending the filibuster. And we have to keep the pressure up. It's not just right now. Contact often, contact every day, talk to your friends. We've got really good momentum in the press right now, which is terrific. So we need to keep that up. It's great that Biden's talking about it. It's great that Manchin is saying something slightly different than he said a few weeks ago. That's how we're going to get this to happen. So I'm going to be quiet and just give everyone a moment to concentrate. And in about 30 seconds or so, we'll move on. All right, does everyone at least maybe have a text in progress we could pick up with later? I hope so. And if you just don't like to text in the moment and you feel pressure, any old time. So, and you can always, of course, contact your senators by calling their offices, visiting their websites, using their web forms, emailing them. They're very reachable. So please feel free to do that. Thank you. And we also want to thank you because we've reached the end of our event this evening, and we've been so delighted to have you all here. And we would like to offer a final round of thanks to Eric. Eric, hooray. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thanks for the action on the filibuster. And I think we can do it. Thanks so much for bringing me in.
All right. Thank you. Let's do it together, everybody. We proved that, working together, we can make change happen. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. Take care.